would you begin your self-introduction?
It would begin with curiosity. I'm an incredibly curious person. Anything that sounds like an adventure, I'm kind of like, yes. And I'm really positive. I am from a huge family, so I grew up with like conflict being part of everyday life.
Can you share a little bit about that family journey?
So I'm one of 11 siblings from the US, Colombia, and my father grew up in Italy. And then he married my mother, who's from the US. 5 children, they decided to move from California, where I was born, to Japan. So I definitely get the adventurous side from my parents. Eventually, they moved to the northernmost city on the Honshu Island, Aomori. And they, to this day, live there. They have an international kindergarten.
How did that affect you in terms of your experience growing up in Aomori?
I had a very limited Japanese language ability, but also understanding of the cultural aspects. I didn't really have a lot of Japanese friends. So the sudden move to Aomori was like night and day for me because I was already older middle school and with no Japanese speaking abilities. The public school said, sorry, she can't integrate here. When we moved to Aomori, I found out that they had one of the most extensive English libraries. And so a lot of my time in middle school and high school, because I was quite alone, I really just kind of became a bit of an introvert and I love to read. And in hindsight, I'm very grateful for that time. But at the time, moving to Aomori was very painful.
It's almost like you've got a triple international family dynamic. What does that look like in terms of like a cross-cultural dynamic in the family?
The one thing that is stronger and more powerful than any of those like dynamics is the core family dynamic. Who we are, how we love to spend time to each other, our sense of adventure, our love for food. You know, you can see like the Latin culture, the American culture, and then we did pick up on the Japanese culture. And so, we're huge fans of politeness and the wa and understanding this sort of have a good time or to connect with another person. That dynamic gave us a sense of core, this is who we are, right? This is our foundation as human beings, and definitely brought self-esteem and self-strength to us as human beings.
Diversity, right? It rocks innovation in great positive ways. And it also rocks us into like a discomfort, like it rocks our worldview. And yet that is the vibrancy. We're always looking at how do you get a democracy to be vibrant and yutaka, right? Like, and you need that different perspectives to really come in and enrich the discussions and the debates and the dialogues.
My younger brother moved to Sendai. Actually, I was planning to visit him for the first time since he had gotten married and had his daughter. And then the 3/11 disaster happened.
And what was your initial reactions at the time?
It was more horrendous than the footage that we saw when the Kobe disaster happened, just because of the way the tsunami looks. My brother's up there, and my family had then called me from Aomori saying, we're putting together a volunteer group because our father had been hired by some journalists and by chance had made his way to Minami Sanriku. They had asked for very simple items like hand lotion, diapers, clothing. A key point, though, is that we wouldn't have been able to do that had my father not been hired by the journalists, because journalists get this pass from the police. All these tiny moments that really enabled the next step. And funding started coming in, and so we rented trucks and we called people to give supplies. And then on the 19th, we drove down to Minami Sanriku. I met up with Yosuke, my colleague from Aomori. Just so happened that their hotel was not completely damaged, and they were desperate for volunteers to come. And that started the connection, and that ended up being the location that to this day we're still based.
Therein began the seeds of Place to Grow.
I was working as a kindergarten teacher at this time in Tokyo, and I just could not find myself there. I found myself, I was still getting calls all day long from people up in Tohoku asking me what to do and where these trucks should be. And I was like, guys, I can't be doing this, taking these calls. And so I had a talk with my boss, and I said, this seems to be calling me. Is there any way that they all really supported? And so I resigned and I went back to Minami Sanriku to help lead a food and water distribution system to about 3,000 people. Initially, we decided to approach kokoro no care, or that emotional support, actually through business. At that period, there was just so much depression and so much anxiety and stress going on that, I'm just going to use business terms, there was a market for tea ceremonies and cake parties, and we did those. But we pushed all our energy into helping local farmers regain old farmland that had sort of become just overrun fields. And I realized that it was that act of physical activity that people needed. They needed to fill their time with something productive. At the end of that effort, there could actually be a financial reward. That was a win-win. So 2012 to 2014 was really full on with the Green Farmers Miyagi project, where we helped people revitalize farmland. That also brought in volunteers and created loads of space for us to have these community building events. And then in 2015, we split because it wasn't sustainable to do both. It was starting to just become this giant organization. We didn't have the resources. And then I really focused observing the last 6 years and going, okay, well, how do we help these people when their homes are starting to rebuild? And the response I got from them was, we're doing okay, but toriaizu soba ni itte kudasai.
Just stay near us.
So how do we bring value? So that meant we had to reevaluate everything. And that was the beginning, though, of the Place to Grow philosophy of people inspire people and healthy body, healthy mind, and inclusion and support. Not create long-term division and dependency, but actually use our activities to bring people closer together, people who may otherwise not get on in the town, bridging capital to a neighboring city or even to their own local government. And so the activities, we did workshops and events that just helped people come together.
You've written, obviously, this amazing book with all of the different principles that you've gleaned out of your social impact work in the post-disaster context. Can you briefly maybe share? I know you have several that you love, but I think there's one in particular you like to highlight.
My favorite is the principle 8, people inspire people. Because that one, I think, was my most personal struggle with. I think I always was hoping for, a bigger NGO or a wiser leader to come in and help lead things. I wondered why we were still succeeding when there were so many times I just honestly didn't have the Japanese skills. But then it occurred to me over many different situations, I finally realized, I was like, God, it's that I keep showing up. Someone told me this. It's like, Ange, you just keep showing up and you keep making us feel like we matter. And I was like, wow, so just that little bit of inspiring you has made you so strong. And then they're the ones that actually have taken Santa Soul Train to what it is to today, or the children's workshops that we do. I just find another way that I'm supporting their next vision. And it's often a co-created vision.
It's really helpful to have, the outsider, the yosomono, and the crazy person, the bakamono, and also the young person, the wakamono, who thinks, like outside the box and is just like starry-eyed. So these three different pieces, it's an internal gaiatsu, it's an internal external pressure, right? To come up, have you keep coming up. They then have a mandate of action to go to the Board of Education and say, hey, we're trying to do this, and Angela's coming up then she has all these partners in Tokyo who want to support, so yoroshiku onegaishimasu, like let's have collaboration for these pieces, but you help give them a mandate to make change that maybe otherwise without that external nudging, they might get shut down. Their ideas might not go through. They might be told it's not possible, right?
It's hard. The burnout is so real when you're left on your own. And that's one of the big values of continuing to volunteer is you help mitigate or ease the stress that causes the burnout for people who are literally rebuilding house and home day in and day out.
Exactly. 10 years later, right? There's still so much.
I always say there's like 3 very specific ways you can help, right? Move to that location. You can stay connected and visit, or you can even do, I think in Japan, you can have your taxes part of that community and then they send you product. There's just coming out of 311, I see this everywhere and in other organizations, just this like when we've gone through such a collectively traumatic ordeal, the most simple thing is what really gives us the biggest strength, and that's please don't forget what we've been through. I learned so much about also not being afraid to say that my means have changed or my skills and expertise, my time and energy have shifted. If people are aligned and you have that same vision, other people step up.